Welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. Please call your order.
Commissioner Bandel,
Here.
Commissioner Bushoyer, Vice Chair Rizzo.
Here.
Chair Chase,
Thank you. Join me
Commissioner Kenny's absent, just
Right.
noting that.
in a salute to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this point in every meeting, we open it to public comment for that which is not on tonight's agenda. So if you have something you want to speak about, you have 3 minutes to do so. There's a microphone back there and you can stand up and speak about something that's not on the agenda. So I see heads shaking, not nodding. And is there anybody online for this at all?
Hands raised online.
Thank you. So then we'll close out the public comment section and we will go directly into the business item for tonight. So tonight we're here about ADUs. This is a study session related to accessory dwelling unit ordinance amendments. This is a review and discussion of potential amendments to Corte Madera zoning ordinance regulations related to accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units, JADUs. So we have a fine staff report, and who's going to start over here?
I will start, and Tracy and I will both be doing this presentation. Good evening, Chair Chase and members of the commission. This evening, you will be discussing accessory dwelling unit and potential amendments to our existing regulations. This is meant to be an informal discussion, so please, if there are questions as we're going through the presentation, feel free. So staff is seeking commission feedback on the existing ADU regulations, which are codified in Chapter 1831. And the discussion tonight is focused on 3 different types of changes. The first are changes to comply with state law. The next are clarifications of existing regulations, and the last are policy amendments and considerations. The commission is not taking any action this evening, but rather will be providing direction and feedback to staff, and we will return with a draft zoning ordinance amendment at a future meeting for the commission's consideration. To facilitate the conversation this evening, we did prepare a draft ordinance, which is included as attachment 4 to the staff report, and a red line version showing proposed changes is included as attachment 5. The town's ADU and JADU regulations are codified in Chapter 1831 of the Municipal Code. This chapter was last updated in 2020 when the town council adopted amendments to comply with a state law in effect at that time. The amendment in 2020 was quite substantial. And since that time, there have been additional ADU bills that were signed that went into effect in January 2023 and January 2024, which require additional changes to the town's ordinance. And the majority of changes proposed are to comply with these recent changes to state law. Since 2020, there have been 63 ADUs that have been permitted in Corte Madera, and an additional 4 ADUs are currently under review. Approved ADUs include a mix of new detached structures, conversion of existing spaces, including basements and accessory structures, and also junior ADUs. And a junior ADU is limited to a maximum size of 500 square feet, and it must be located within an existing or proposed residence, and it can include an attached garage. The size of the ADUs approved range from 182 square feet to 1,200 square feet. And the size of JADUs that have been approved range in size from 162 square feet to 497 square feet. Attachment 2 of the staff report includes a list of all the ADUs that have been permitted since 2020, and this map is included as attachment 3. So there have been recent state bills that, again, these 2 bills went into effect on January 1st, 2023. It's Senate Bill 897 and then Assembly Bill 2221. And these particular bills require changes to the draft ordinance related to things such as placement of an ADU. It allows for increasing of height of an attached ADU up to 25 feet, and also for a detached ADU to be up to 18 feet if certain criteria are met. And there are also changes related to building code requirements such as fire sprinklers. And also unpermitted structures can only be required to be brought up to codes if it's related to health and safety concerns. Another bill that went into effect on January 1st, 2024 has created a pathway where jurisdictions can allow for the separate conveyance or the separate sale of an ADU. And this bill does not require jurisdictions to allow the separate sale, but rather creates a pathway to allow this. There have only been a couple of jurisdictions in California that we know of that have adopted local ordinances to allow for the separate sale. And that includes Berkeley, San Jose, and the city of Martinez. And staff is not recommending that we adopt a local ordinance at this time to allow for the separate sale of ADUs. And then another legislation is Assembly Bill 1332. And this particular bill requires that all jurisdictions in the state have a pre-approved ADU plans program in place by January 1st, 2025. And planning and building staff are working with other jurisdictions in Marin County and also with the ADU Center to comply with this new regulation by the January 1st deadline. And there also have been additional ADU bills that were just signed by the governor the end of this legislative session just a couple of weeks ago. And staff and the town attorney are evaluating if additional changes are required to comply with these most recent bills. It's likely there are some additional changes. And I now would like to turn it over to Tracy, who will be going over proposed changes to comply with state law.
Thank you. Good evening. As Martha said, the majority of changes to our existing ADU ordinance are required in order to comply with state law. And an area of change is related to the allowed number of ADUs on a parcel. Our existing ADU regulations allow a maximum of 2 units. And the only way to permit 2 units on a property would be to combine a detached ADU with a JADU. And consistent with state law, the draft ordinance would allow for a maximum of 3 units, which would be an interior ADU constructed within the residence, a JADU, and a new detached ADU. And this change is based upon an updated interpretation by HCD of a certain provision of California Government Code. HCD has clarified in their recent ADU handbook that the allowed number of units is any combination of units. And furthermore, as HCD is reviewing local jurisdictions' ADU ordinances, part of their ordinance review letters is commenting on this, that to be consistent with state law, local jurisdictions should allow the combination that's shown on the right-hand side of this slide, that interior ADU, JADU, and detached ADU. Another area of change to be consistent with state law is related to the allowed height of ADUs. Our existing ADU ordinance permits an attached or detached ADU to be a maximum of 16 feet in height, or when the ADU is constructed over a garage, the total combined height of the structure is allowed to be a maximum of 25 feet in height. And height regulations have changed in several ways. That's the right-hand side of this slide. A detached ADU that's within a half a mile of a major transit stop may be up to 18 feet in height. And then we need to allow an additional 2 feet of height to accommodate a roof pitch on the ADU that's aligned with the roof pitch on the primary residence. And it's worth noting that in Corte Madera, we don't have any single family homes that are within a half mile of a major transit stop as it's defined by the Public Resource Code. So we're not likely to see that first scenario. And then another area of change made with recent legislation is that a detached ADU on a lot with a multifamily, multi-story building on it may be up to 18 feet in height. And an additional significant change is that the attached ADU, which under existing regulations is allowed to be 16 feet in height. Now state law is allowing that to be up to 25 feet in height. We are not required, though, to allow an ADU to exceed 2 stories. And then lastly, there's no change to the allowed height of an ADU above a garage. That is still 25 feet in height, the same as our existing regulation. And yet another area of change is related to setbacks. As you're probably familiar, an attached or detached ADU may reduce the applicable underlying zoning setbacks for side and rear to 4 feet minimum. And in those cases, that ADU is limited to a maximum size of 800 square feet. Any attached or detached ADU that exceeds 800 square feet needs to meet the underlying setbacks for side and rear. And our existing regulations do not permit an ADU in the front yard setback. The state legislation has not changed the 4-foot setback regulation, nor is there a change to ADU setbacks that are greater than 800 square feet. A significant change related to setbacks is the last one on the screen here, and that is that ADUs are allowed in the front yard setback in some instances. And in other words, we need to relax the front yard setback if there's no other feasible location on the property that can accommodate the ADU. Another area of change is related to the objective development standards that we apply to certain ADUs. Our existing regulation includes these standards. They're related to lighting, landscaping or tree removal, windows, and limitations on grading to accommodate ADUs. And these standards are included in 1831-080. And staff has been applying these standards to all ADUs regardless of their size. And based on ADU state law, objective standards can't be applied to ADUs that are created under Government Code 66323, which is otherwise known as a statewide exemption ADU. These ADUs are interior ADUs, JADUs, and detached ADUs that are 800 square feet and less. We cannot apply objective standards to those. We can only apply height, size, and setbacks to those statewide exemption ADUs. Objective standards, though, can be applied to ADUs that are not statewide exemption, those that are new attached or those that are greater than 800 square feet. So our draft ordinance still contains these objective standards, but clarifies what types of ADUs that they can apply to. We also have created 2 new definitions that define what that statewide exemption ADU is and what a statewide exemption JADU is. Another change that we have identified is related to the number of bedrooms that are allowed in an ADU. Our existing ADU ordinance limits ADUs to a maximum of 2 bedrooms. And the HCD handbook discourages this type of limitation because it may be discriminatory towards family size. And so staff is recommending not to place a limit on the number of bedrooms. There is a change to junior ADU regulations to comply again with state law. Our existing regulation says the JADU has to be created within the walls of the existing residence and has to include an existing bedroom. And consistent with state law, a JADU does not have to include a bedroom. It does need to be created within the walls of the existing residence, but it can include areas and other uses in the residence that are attached to the residence, like a garage or a storage area. So that clarification has been made in the draft ordinance. There is a change that we are recommending to clarify an existing regulation, and that's related to ADUs that are located above a garage. As I said earlier, our existing ADU ordinance states that when more than half of the floor area of the ADU is located above the garage, the entire combined structure can't exceed 25 feet in height. But it doesn't establish setbacks for the detached garage and ADU combination. An ADU pursuant to state law can be set back 4 feet from side and rear property lines. So what we are seeking to clarify in the draft ordinance is that if the ADU is combined with a garage, that combined structure does need to meet underlying zoning setbacks for rear and side. And additionally, we're clarifying that the square footage of a new detached garage constructed as part of an ADU, that entire structure counts as floor area for the ADU. And I'll just hand it back to Mark.
So the last category is proposed policy amendments and consideration. So the existing ordinance establishes a maximum height of 16 feet for a detached ADU. And as the commission is aware, any new detached residential structure that's constructed in the FEMA special flood hazard area is required to be raised 1 foot above base flood elevation. So we've seen through implementation of the ordinance that properties in the floodplain have a challenging time complying with the FEMA regulations to raise the structure and also meet the height requirement. And there have been several ADUs that originally started out as a detached structure. And due to challenges with complying with the height standard, they redesigned to an attached structure to the main house that was not elevated. So staff is recommending that in instances when an ADU is required to be raised to meet federal, state, and local standards, that an additional height be allowed. And it would be what we've proposed is 1 foot additional height for each foot that the structure is required to be raised to meet FEMA standards, up to a maximum of 20 feet. And as Tracy mentioned, the rear and side yard setbacks for detached structures are 4 feet. So we're also proposing that in instances when an ADU is raised to comply with FEMA standards, that the side and rear setbacks be increased 1 foot for each foot that the structure is raised. So a structure can be, again, up to a maximum of 20 feet if it needs to be raised 4 feet to comply with FEMA standards, and the required setback instead of 4 feet would be 8 feet. So this shows the height of a structure at 16 feet. The required setbacks are 4 feet for both side and rear. This next image illustrates a structure in the floodplain, which is required to be raised to comply with FEMA standards. And staff has proposed instead of a 16-foot height limit, that the max height would be 20 feet in instances when the structure is required to be raised 4 feet. And then for each foot the structure is raised, the side and rear yard setback would be increased by a foot. Another area where we've recommended changes is for ADU permits. An ADU permit in our current regulations are required for all attached ADUs, regardless of size. For detached ADUs that are 800 square feet or more, or exceed 800 square feet, and then also for ADUs that are created from accessory structures, if the structure is increased by more than 20% or more than 150 square feet, and it's whichever is greater of those two numbers. And an ADU permit is the first step in a 2-step process, and it's a ministerial application that's reviewed by the planning division. And as part of the review, planning staff reviews the ADU to ensure that it complies with state standards and also with our ADU ordinance. And as part of that process, we send out a courtesy notice to everyone within 300 feet of the project site. And then once the ADU permit has been approved, and then at that point, the applicant submits a building permit application to the building department. So staff is recommending that attached ADUs that are no taller than 16 feet, that those be no longer require an ADU permit. And that would align the regulation with detached ADUs, which do not need an ADU permit if it's no greater than 16 feet. And we have some examples of ADUs that have required or not required ADU permits. So again, a detached ADU, as long as it does not exceed 800 square feet, it does not require an ADU permit. an applicant submits directly to the building division or with a building permit. So these are two examples. On the left is 10 South Way. That was a 800 square foot detached ADU. And then on the right is 2 Lanyard Cove, which is a 610 square foot ADU. These next pictures illustrate ADUs where we're recommending that an ADU permit no longer be required. On the left is 525 Tamalpais, and we actually have the owner in the audience. This was a 587 square foot attached ADU, and the height of the ADU is 11 feet 3 inches. On the right-hand side is 2 Presidio Court. This ADU was created through a combination of conversion of existing floor area and also a small addition. This ADU has a height of 11 feet 10 inches. And again, these are ADUs that staff is recommending no longer require an ADU permit since they are not greater than 800 square feet and the height is not greater than 16 feet. And as part of the review process, planning would still evaluate an application like this through the building permit review to verify that it meets all objective standards of the town's ordinance and then also state law as well. And these last pictures show examples of attached ADUs where we are recommending an ADU permit still be required. So on the left is 447 Tamalpais Drive. This ADU was created through a conversion of a portion of the existing residence and also an addition. And the size of the ADU is approximately 900 square feet. On the right-hand side is 267 Goldenheim Passage, which is above the garage. Obviously, the height in this case exceeds 16 feet. I think the height is around just over 22 feet. And so for both of these, an ADU permit would still be required since they do not meet the two, since they are over 800 square feet or exceed a height of 16 feet. And the last topic where we're seeking feedback from the commission is on the window standard. So the existing ordinance has a window standard which is in place to address privacy concerns. And the standard requires that windows on an elevation of an ADU be clear story with a minimum sill height of 6.5 feet. If the ADU elevation is within 15 feet of a shared rear or side property boundary, and the structure on the adjacent property has windows that face the ADU. So we're interested in seeking input from the Planning Commission on both the sill height, if that's appropriate, the 6.5 feet, and also the distance to property boundaries at 15 feet. And we also intend to clarify that the standard is silent on doors, on if a glass door would be allowed on an elevation in which otherwise this window standard would apply. So we're recommending that that be clarified in the ordinance as well. So for next steps, planning staff and building staff plan to hold a community workshop on October 17th. And the goals of the workshop include providing an overview of proposed modifications to the ordinance, providing an update on the pre-approved ADU plans program that will take effect on January 1st, and also on discussing tools that are available to homeowners who are interested in constructing an ADU on their property. And planning staff will further develop the various amendments and return to the Planning Commission with a draft ordinance for the Planning Commission's consideration, and the commission will make a recommendation to the Town Council. That concludes our presentation, and we're available for questions.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Tracy. Very concise, cogent. So commissioners, we will now ask some questions of staff if you have any. Then we will eventually go through this to discuss it by section. I think might be the best way if we have a lot of comments. We will take public comment on this, and we will try to issue a concise set of statements from all of us about this. So, Martha, do you have any, Margaret, do you have any questions for Martha?
Could you Just summarize the parking issues for me.
So parking is not required if the ADU is within a half mile of a transit stop. And the definition of transit excludes bus stops that include routes that are designed to take students to school. So most of the bus stops on the east side of town do not qualify as being within a half mile of transit. And so they are required to provide an parking space for the ADU. And the parking space for the ADU can be located in tandem with the required spaces of the home. And they also can be on the driveway as well. So no changes are recommended related to the parking standards.
So, if a JADU is in an attached garage, or the attached garage is a JADU now, what would the parking issues be for that residence?
So state statute states that when a garage is converted to an ADU or JADU or demolished and rebuilt into an ADU, that we cannot require replacement parking for the primary residence. So if a JADU or if a garage is converted to a JADU, then there would be no compliant parking for the primary residence.
One thing of note too is that we also can't require parking when the ADU is built entirely within an existing structure. So it's not just that if it's within half mile of public transit, so if it's contained within the existing structure, whether it's the garage or a place in the home, we can't require parking for the ADU. So not only if you convert the garage to ADU or JADU, and your ADU or JADU is contained within the garage, you can't require replacement parking, and we also can't require parking for the ADU.
Thank you, that cleared that up. And how many ADUs were approved before the 2020 when you started measuring it? Do you know that?
Not nearly as many. I think between 2016 and 2020, I think it was around 20-ish. We could get that number. It's in prior staff reports, so we
So
can.
would you say all in all, like 80? Sounds like that.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
And just out of curiosity, because I thought it was kind of odd. Do you have any idea what a transit stop would have to do with the height of the building? Even though it doesn't apply to, how does it relate?
That one too.
Is there any reason it relates?
I don't think there's any reason it relates. I think the legislature was just looking for avenues to allow increased height and remove barriers, and the transit is defined throughout state law, so.
Their theory is that it's better to have more people if there's a transit stop there, but why a higher ceiling would make more people be living there is a mystery to us all.
That's great. Thank you for this. It clarified a lot of issues.
All right, thank you very much, Margaret. Over here on my right, there's Valerie.
That's not an order. All right. Okay, I have a couple of the questions. So for the going back to the same parking, with the not being requiring the parking, right, and not providing any as well, do you guys or are you doing it right now, like providing any studies or having any data to see what neighborhoods are impacted the most by potentially having owners building ADUs in those areas, and perhaps looking into restriction measures in those areas to provide so that people don't park on those streets because it will be overcrowded?
We haven't received any concerns or comments from neighbors about parking issues. And, we wouldn't want to, if we're going to establish a standard that you couldn't park on streets, we wouldn't want, that would be something that would be citywide, not just for people that had, ADUs. But we have not received, complaints from any.
Yeah, and that's what I thought, like maybe like citywide study, just because of I feel like some neighborhoods will be impacted the most, whereas others won't be. So perhaps some data on that would be very helpful just to see what neighborhoods potentially could have an issue in the future.
And we do limit ADUs in Christmas Tree Hill. We have the capacity districts that are still in place, and we are not recommending changes to that. So I think that's an area of town that has very limited street parking, and there's a limited number of ADUs that are.
Which takes me to my other question about the capacity on Christmas Hill there, because the Christmas Tree Hill, I think you mentioned 10% cap there. So will it be a lottery based for homeowners to apply? How would you control that?
It's first come, first serve, and there are 11 capacity districts, and the majority of capacity districts are already at full capacity. So there are only a couple areas within Christmas Tree Hill where additional ADUs can be built.
And will there be any possibility for the owners to, like, let's say you reach the capacity and then in the future someone else wants to do it because they have the aging parent living with them and they really want to have that possibility to take care of them? Will they be just out of the limit completely, or town will be kind of looking at it case by case study, or have you put any plans for that?
There currently are no plans to evaluate additional ADUs beyond the capacity districts. So if the district is at max capacity, then the only way for someone to be able to do an ADU is if someone with an existing ADU removes that ADU.
Just to add into that, there may be an opportunity through another part of our code under a reasonable accommodation. So if someone has a medical need and can show that, there could be a relaxation of code for that purpose. But that is kind of an extreme example.
I see. Okay. Okay, so then the other question is more, I guess, like brainstorm. So there are a lot of startups right now that emerged in the market in California because of the ADU, and they offer all kinds of these pre-approved plans for the ADU, and they come in all kinds of styles. So will we have any guidelines that would control what can go, cannot go to Corte Madera in a way? Because I feel like a lot of plans are they are the same essentially, in the interior, but on the outside they are all over the place, and I feel like it could really change what we're trying to do here essentially.
ADU that is detached in maximum of 800 square feet, the only standards we can apply are height, setbacks, and size. So there's nothing we can do as far as architectural guidelines or standards. And I would say most of these prefab companies, that tends to be their niche, is these detached kind of smaller backyard units. What we have seen is the majority are in backyards. So I don't think they're typically not visible from roads.
Yeah, but with the new regulation, right, it seems like the front yard now is available as well, so they might start.
And the front yard, an ADU would only be allowed in the front yard if that's the only viable location on the property for an ADU. So if there's space in the backyard, then we can deny requests for an ADU in the front yard.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just to add on to that, another benefit of the pre-approved ADU plans is that we can encourage or incentivize certain sets of plans that we feel meet the character of what we're trying to approve. So we can be a little more selective about the pre-approved plans that we provide. And those would be, at a low cost or free to community. So it may be some of those modular companies as well. But we would be able to vet those and then suggest those are the ones that we would prefer and would obviously have a more streamlined process.
I see. Okay, so then my next question is if the ADU is less than 800 square feet and does not require a permit, and owner wants to customize the pre-approved plan, I would say, would they have to go through the permit?
It depends. And once we get further along, we can provide a presentation to you on that program. But how it's worked in other areas is that the architect's information is provided. So if someone wanted to do something custom, they would work with the architect to customize that. But it would most likely need to go through our plan check process to confirm that it does meet building code and standards. If it's more than just finishes or something more structural. So it just kind of depends on the situation.
I see. And then for the junior ADU that is attached to the house and that is less than 800 square feet, does it need fire separation? And if it does, like, how does it avoid the permitting? Yeah, fire separation, like a 1 hour wall between the main house and the ADU itself.
Junior ADU is limited to maximum size of 500 square feet. And by definition, that has to be within the existing structure, and it can include an attached garage. And my understanding is that building requirements are not as stringent for a junior ADU versus an ADU. And that's one of the reasons I think some people go in that direction. But we can confirm that with our building official and clarify at the next meeting.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused of what takes it from, multi-family housing to an ADU and and the owner, right? Because if we are not giving that fire separation to the attached ADUs, right? Like it kind of but it's a multi-family now. How are we ensuring the public safety from the architecture standpoint?
If I may, all of these ADUs are required to comply with the building code. So if the building code requires, certain kinds of fireproof insulation, for example, they would have to provide that for new construction. It's only if it's existing construction that they wouldn't.
But it sounds like it's a loophole with the junior ADUs because they can,
Oh.
yeah.
The junior ADU is created entirely within existing space. So yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
ADU can also share a bathroom with the primary residence. So there oftentimes is internal connections because of that issue as well.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for clarifying all of this. Okay, and then my other question is the same thing. I guess it's all connected for the no limitations on bedrooms. Again, code requires the minimum for the dwelling unit for the bedroom size. So again, like if we are talking about, like, let's say 500 square feet, but there's no limitations on the bedroom, like, right? How, like, it sounds, again, there is a loophole for the owners to avoid the compliance with the building code.
So no limit on the number of bedrooms is only within the ADU ordinance. They would still need to comply with the building code, which I think does have a minimum sleeping area size. I want to say it's 70 square feet, but there is a limitation in that way in meeting building code requirements on your number of bedrooms based on the floor area that you're proposing bedrooms within and the minimums that set forth. That makes sense.
Additionally, there can only be one kitchen. And so that wouldn't be considered separate units, no matter how many bedrooms there are, because there would only be one kitchen for the entire structure.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. All right, if anything else pops up, I have a lot, but if anything else pops up, I'm just like, all others, if you like.
We won't forget about you. No. Okay, Jim, your thoughts or questions for staff on this?
Okay.
Questions for staff?
Could you clarify, I know this happened to me, so I just want to know, so the audience might know, I was not required to do, to pay for an ADU permit, but I was able to get an ADU because the square footage was a certain amount. Is it's under 750 square feet?
So ADUs that are 750 square feet or less are not required to pay any impact fees. So in our the typical impact fee that we have is the street impact fee, and that's based on the valuation of a project. So smaller ADUs are exempt from paying this particular fee. ADUs still pay building permit
And
fees.
a review fee.
Yes.
And if someone wants to build a one-bedroom ADU and it's larger than 850 square feet, is there any trigger for them to need to do any discretionary review or anything like that? Like you have that kind of line at 850, like the 900 square foot one that we saw earlier today on Tamalpais?
Yeah, so the one on Tamalpais was a 2-bedroom ADU.
Okay,
But there's currently nothing in the draft ordinance that would allow a 1-bedroom ADU to exceed 850 square feet. There is an allowance in our existing regulations to allow for an ADU greater than 1,000 square feet, up to a maximum of 1,200 square feet,
Mhm.
with approval of the design review from the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission could opt to allow 1-bedroom ADUs to be more than. Anne, could we be less restrictive than state code? And
Please be less restrictive than state code as a rule, especially when it comes to housing. But you're not required. You can require somebody who wants a bigger ADU to go through discretionary design review, just as they might for any other structure they wanted to build.
so they could go through a discretionary review.
We
If-
could require them to do it. It really is a policy decision for the town.
Okay, so but currently our policy is nothing more than 850 square feet for a one-bedroom.
correct.
I was just saying if there's, so it sounds like the only time something would come across this commission would be if someone was trying to build something between 1,000 and 1,200 square feet.
Correct. And I
Within
think,
the guidelines we're establishing tonight.
and I think the only ADU that has come before the commission is 15 Deer Run, which was a 1,200 square foot ADU. So that did come before the commission, but all the other ADUs have been either just an ADU permit or a building permit.
Okay. Makes sense. And then, let's see, I wanted you to clarify a little bit with this splitting of the floor area with if it's detached. So just to clarify, if you do a detached garage and it's within the setbacks and it's 800 square feet, you could build 800 square feet above it. Only when it's out of the setback, you have to split, or within the guidelines of the ADU code, you need to split it. You understand what I'm saying? Like you got a 400 square foot garage, you got a 400 square foot ADU, but it's within the ADU parameters. But if you're within the guidelines, the 20-foot setback, you're actually within the building envelope, you built your garage, can you still build 800 square feet above it?
Is the garage for the ADU or is the garage for the?
No, I'm just saying like you have the way it reads, it's like if it's over a garage, you're splitting the square footage. I'm asking if what if there wasn't a garage? Like, let's say you had a big lot and you're detached and you're within the guide, like you're within the setbacks. You're not, 4 feet from the property line, you're within the setbacks and you want to build an ADU. Are you saying you can't build an 800 square foot garage and 880 square foot ADU because
It
You're s-
depends. Like, for instance, if parking is required for the ADU and the applicant says my parking is in that garage for the ADU, then we would say, well, then the garage is part of the ADU and your ADU is 800 plus 800, 1,600, it's too big. But if the garage is not for the ADU, and that could be a little tricky to ensure we're getting correct information from the applicant. But if the garage is not providing parking for the ADU, the applicant would say, the garage is not for the ADU. Therefore, I'm going to put my 800 square foot ADU on top of it. We would say,
I'm just saying a bigger lot, like we do have lots that are 10,000 plus and someone might want to do a carriage house type of situation.
yep, in that case, you would need a new permit because it's greater than 16 feet height. Your height would be limited to 25 feet in height because it's over a garage.
But you could do 800 square feet.
It would be in the buildable area.
Yeah.
In this example, yeah.
Yeah, it's, yeah, because it wasn't clear.
If, right, we have opined that if the garage is new construction with the ADU on top and the garage is not for the ADU, you need a design review for the garage.
Correct.
Right.
So you do a design review and an ADU permit. And so you got to check all the boxes,
Nor
but
the
it's
ADU
possible, like, you know, for a larger house to build a carriage house is what I'm getting at, like something on top of garage or something
Yes.
within, okay. And then Martha answered the question about the transit stop because I was interesting to know that East Corte Madera does not have transit stops available to them because it's not school routes. Right, correct. And I was also perplexed on the height of the 2 feet, but I'm thinking that that might just be because you might be able to do a flat roof, 2-story structure too, and add square footage. And hard to get through all the notes, I tell you. I think that's it for now, Peter. Thank you.
All right, well, we will check back in with you, I'm sure. For myself, a couple of things I wanted to ask about. On page 3, under the title discussion, it says the stated purpose of the town's ADU regulations, et cetera, while they remain compatible with existing neighborhood. What I'm hearing in these ADU regulations is that there's absolutely no discretionary review. So it seems like sort of a conflict to say that they, as long as they remain compatible with the existing neighborhood. You know, we've got ADUs going in that have no compatibility. We're powerless, right, to ensure compatibility with the neighbor. There's nothing, it says this, but that's off the table. Essentially.
That's correct. Can strike that from the ordinance.
Can you help me understand the front yard setback a little bit? When you say it precludes that if there's no other place, then you can throw away the front yard setback. Does that mean that they can come up to the lot line, or what does it mean about where the ADU can land and if there's no other place?
Have to justify what the reduction in the front yard setback would need to be in order to construct this ADU. It's not that to come to a 0 setback in the front, and I think it's better put to say that if there's no other feasible location to construct the ADU, that then we would need to relax our front setback requirements. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the front setback is erased, but what will it take for you to be able to construct the ADU partially within the front yard setback? It hasn't been tested, obviously. And there is a provision where if that an ADU permit could be denied if it affects health and safety, and the building official would need to make that determination. So I'm bringing that up because we do have corner lots, in Corte Madera, which would be greatly affected by a structure 16 feet in height. It's that very close
Yeah.
to the front and side. So like I said, it hasn't been tested yet, but I think it's a good way to think about it is that no other feasible location for the ADU. What is the relaxation that's required on the front in order to accommodate the ADU?
They're gonna have to negotiate with you.
They're gonna have to justify clearly
Yeah.
what is preventing them from constructing it
Right.
elsewhere.
And maybe in the next revision by the state, there'll be something, but now there's nothing about it. They're just saying, let them put it there. Leaving it up to you, figure it out with them, the applicant. Is that fair to say? I do know someone in Richmond that was told by one person they couldn't put it in their front yard. They ended up getting a permit to put it in their front yard. with an appropriate, a guy like Jim advocating for her.
I think if we were to have an application for this, questions across multiple, what may or may not. Fire department.
Okay. Are you guys gonna, add some graphics? Because that one graphic you did about the height and the setbacks was very explanatory. So I think that a couple of more might be really helpful to illustrate some of these things. That ADU height required setback. I think it's a necessity. That's just a thought. Anyway, I think that's all I have. Does anybody else want to say something else? Yes.
I remembered. I just wanted to clarify, so you could do 3 units, but one of them has to be attached, right? One of them can be a JADU, ADU inside an existing house.
And the attached is required to be created from existing space.
Oh, the attached can be,
It's with, yeah.
you
it's
could
within
make
the
an addition
existing
and then you can
residence.
add an accessory building, a detached building as well.
Yeah, if my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, and if you do a new attached ADU.
Yeah.
That's all you can have. In order to get the 3 units, you're creating an existing ADU or an ADU within your existing home.
Uh-huh.
You're creating the JADU within the existing home, and then you're doing a new detached ADU.
And then my last question would be, going back to the floodplain conversation. It seems that, if it's in a floodplain and it's getting raised and it's attached, they can still go up to 25 feet without relaxing their setbacks, correct? I mean, they got to stay within the 6-foot side setback, but they can also go into the rear yard setback and be 25 feet if it's attached.
Correct. The new state legislation that went into effect in 2023 increases the height of an attached ADU up to 25 feet. In the past, what we were seeing was before that new requirement went into effect. So people were attaching the ADU
Uh-huh.
and they weren't raising it because we look at if it's a substantial improvement. So as long as
It's attached, and it could still encroach on the rear yard setback slightly and it doesn't. Okay,
yeah,
that
and an
makes sense.
attached ADU also reduces rear and side yard setbacks to 4 feet. The same for a detached and an attached, if it's 800 square feet or less.
Oh, so you can decrease it to 4 feet under 25 feet. Okay. It's only on the detached unit that you can increase up to 20 feet. Correct. That's it, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, oh, yes, all right.
Could you just review if there's nothing that a neighbor can do, basically, once it's approved, the courtesy notices is that a requirement to be sent out or no?
Ordinance, yes. Under state law, no.
Okay, and just because I'm curious, what happens to property taxes once all these additional units are? Does the county get notice of it? Does the city? I mean, what's going on with property taxes now?
I'm not sure exactly how an ADU would affect property taxes exactly in the terms of money. But what the town does, like with every single one of our building permits, is we provide that information to the county appraiser's office, what the scope of work on the building permit was, its valuation, how much it cost, that person reported that it will cost them to construct that improvement. And the county assessor then adjusts your parcel taxes in accord with that information, and including asking property owners how far along that they are with their project, in case they need to assess you or increase property taxes mid-construction even.
Margaret, you actually get, I just went through this if you want to know. So you actually get assessed during the construction. So they actually want increased property taxes as you go along throughout the year. And then my property tax did increase at the end of the year, so.
Yeah. It,
And
Everything.
just what Peter said about the graphics, I was thinking that maybe some kind of chart or flow chart. If you want this, then this is what you have to do, like a kind of something to make it easier for people to sort of fit their project in with what has to happen.
Yes, yeah, those are great suggestions. We likely would create handouts for homeowners to help
Yeah,
them kind
yeah.
of understand the process.
Because it's easy to miss something with so many different regulations. The other thing that I have a question of is in the handout, and I don't even know what part it is, about parking. It's in number 18.31.100 parking. In parentheses D, paragraph D, when a garage, carport, or covered parking structure is demolished in conjunction with the construction of an ADU or is converted to an ADU, the spaces eliminated from that structure are not required to be replaced elsewhere on the lot. That's pretty much is that what we had discussed earlier?
Yes, and I believe that language is straight from the state statute.
That's all.
okay, thank you. And we have some patient folks here. If you want to comment on anything, we have a 3-minute time limit on this, and if you want to step up to the microphone and no, you have to, it's recorded, so you have to stand up there.
Hi there, my name is Diane Petty and I'm with my daughter and we bought a duplex in Corte Madera recently. And Tracy was very helpful, amazing, helping us get some trees that were dangerous out with permits and all that. So we may eventually want to build an ADU. We're not sure, we're just learning right now. But I just have a general question with the 60 ADU that have been built in the last 4 years. Are they typically being rented out or are they more used for elder parents or teenagers? So they're adding living space, but not necessarily more people and cars, because I think that kind of makes a difference. When people talk about plunking a whole pile of buildings down and that's multiple cars and multiple more people, from what I've heard from a few people that I know that are looking at ADUs, they're more thinking they want their parents to come live with them and the parents can't drive or won't be driving. And so it's not necessarily as bad as it sounds. So I'm just wondering if anyone knows that with the 60, what are they actually being used for? And they're not allowed to be used for vacation rentals, right? Okay, good. Okay, that's it. Should I sit down now?
Thank you. They will, we'll see if other questions there are and staff can address your questions. Sir, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Phil Simon. I'm a member of the Climate Action Committee, but I'm speaking here as a member of the public. I sense from the presentation that at least 2 of the proposed regulations seem to be arbitrarily restrictive. The first provides a maximum of 3 units. My understanding of that is, by example, if you have a 5,000 square foot house, you can put an interior ADU in it. So you have a 4,200 square foot house, 800 square foot ADU. Then you can also attach a JADU, which is like 400 square feet. And then you can add a separate ADU that's 800 square feet. So if you had a lot that was 18,000 square feet, then you'd have an FAR still under 35. I think you have to meet that requirement. Is that right?
The requirement, you're saying that the square footage you think would allow for a larger ADU?
No. I'm saying that this would be a scenario that would be approved.
In terms of just getting an ADU? because
If
of,
you had a 5,000 square foot house, put an interior 800 square foot ADU in it, added a 400 square foot JADU to it, and then built a detached 800 square foot ADU. If you had an 18,000 square foot lot, you could do that. Because it would be, provide an FAR under 35. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
okay, first question.
Asking that question.
Did you have any other questions you want to ask?
Okay, and so what I'm saying is, I think state law allows for 2 detached ADUs to be built on a lot. And I'm saying that I think that that's, if you have a 26,000 square foot lot with a 1,200 square foot house on it, you can only build 1 detached ADU. And what I'm saying is it may be reasonable to build 2 detached ADUs. You'd still have a maximum of 3 units property. And if the FAR, in my case, would be less than 15. Because a huge lot, 3 small buildings compared to a relatively small lot, and 1 huge building and 1 small building crammed onto the lot. So that just seems arbitrary.
Okay,
The other comment I have is on the regulation where setbacks are 4 feet if the ADU is 800 square feet. But if it's, that's the proposed regulation, I'm saying why 800 square feet? What if a better aesthetic can be achieved by getting reasonably close to a neighboring property with a larger ADU? I think that should be allowed and not limited to 800 square feet. Also, I think allowing height increases if an ADU is raised to FEMA standards because we have intelligence now on sea level rise that enabling development in historic marshland is not far-sighted.
all right, thank you very much. Do you guys have that information on your notepads there to address?
Yeah, in regards to the number of units, Mr. Simon is correct that you could carve out 800 square feet within the existing residence. The JADU also needs to be within the existing residence, so you couldn't do an addition for the JADU, but you could do up to a 500 square foot JADU within the existing residence, and then the detached 800 square foot. So the 3 units in addition to the primary home. In regards to the number of detached units, state law allows multiple detached ADUs on properties developed with a multifamily building. The current legislation allows up to 2 detached ADUs if there's an existing multifamily structure. And most recent state law allows even more than that, depending on the number of existing multifamily. But as far as single family homes go, you're limited to the 1 detached ADU.
They would have to subdivide the lot to get.
And that is an opportunity for people with larger properties. You could do an SB9 lot split and subdivide the property into 2 lots, and then you have more development options.
But essentially, the size of the ADU and JADU are defined regardless of the size of the lot.
Correct. And then our ordinance also does allow for an exceedance of lot coverage and floor area standards to the extent to allow someone to construct an 800 square foot ADU. So if you are maxed out on floor area and lot coverage, you still can build an 800 square foot ADU on your property.
Okay, thank you.
Martha, real quick, you could have, if the gentleman flipped it and had the JADU within the interior of the building envelope, you can't increase the building envelope if it was a regular ADU, correct? And then because you can increase if it's attached, right? Only if it's not a JADU. That's the way I was reading it. Like you could still increase your volume of, or is it, I don't know if it's the
So
two of
yeah,
them.
to get the 3 units, both the ADU and the JADU need to be within the existing residence.
Okay,
And then on top of that, you can do a 800 square foot detached unit as well.
Accomplish what you're talking about, one could construct an addition right through regular processes.
Yeah.
okay.
Come back later with the ADU inside that space if they really wanted to expand the building envelope prior to construction of the interior. So two steps there.
Can I ask just a clarifying question? So if you have maxed out your FAR and decide to convert the wing of your house into attached ADU, will that be subtracted from your FAR and then therefore you will be able to build out? And
We don't subtract from lot coverage and floor area, but regardless of what that is, someone can build an ADU. So when people come into the counter and they're talking about doing an addition and doing an ADU, we let them know you need to think about how you're sequencing this because you don't want to first construct an ADU and then max out your floor area because you could not later come back and do an addition. Whereas you can do the addition first and then do an ADU down the road and you're allowed to exceed those development standards.
I think a good way of putting it is that the town is only required to allow you to exceed lot coverage and floor area standards for purposes of construction of an ADU. So if you're going to exceed your lot coverage or floor area standards with an ADU, that's not invisible floor area. That's the exceedance that we allow, not for coming back at a later date and adding on a garage or another, not an ADU. Does that make sense?
it does, yeah. Art.
All right. So the other residents in the room left, but is there anybody online that you have to comment at all at this point?
No one online with a hand raised.
Okay. So the first commenter asked about occupants of ADUs in the town. So we talked about that before the meeting a little bit, but please respond to that if you can. About who's,
I think we think about half are being used as rentals or for family members or what have you. But we are working on getting some of that data, and that's part of issuance of the building permit for an ADU. Applicants are required to fill out a survey now that states how they're using it, if they know, and how much they're renting it for, if they know. So once we accumulate some of that data, we could probably provide a lot more clear answer. I think the other question was whether or not they could be used as short-term rentals, and ADUs cannot be used as short-term rentals. Short-term rental is less than 30 days, so Airbnb and
right, okay. So it's anecdotal at this point. There's nothing verifiable. Okay. So here we have a lot of questions answered. We've got these 3 different divisions of this staff report, A, B, and C. And one is proposed changes to comply with state law. Then the next part was proposed changes to clarify existing regulations. And third was proposed policy amendments and considerations. So we know that I'm not going to do much about complying with state law. But we do have proposed changes to clarify existing regulations and proposed policy amendments and considerations. So B, which is the proposed changes, was under that heading was simply ADUs located above a garage. Jim has grilled you about that. And I'm going to take this and see if other commissioners have any thoughts about this that they would like to impart to staff. All right.
Hey,
Yes.
just have, I'm having a lot of trouble with the parking issues. And I think that, I mean, I have no way of dealing with this, but I think it's just sort of edging into a real issue when you have somebody who basically destroys parking spaces, making it into an ADU or building above it and wiping out the bottom part of it, and somebody who has run into issues with the town and design review because of parking. I think it's just making the waters very muddy, and there's a lot of inequity that I see here between people and their parking space issues. And I think that the town is going to face a lot of that sort of dealing with that inequity and how people are using their this I don't know how to say cloudy parking issue for somebody who has permanent parking spaces, ADU parking spaces, JADU, not parking spaces, tandem. We see it here all the time, and every year we're talking about variances for parking. And I think it's going to be a problem for the staff, and I think it's going to be a problem for the planning commission and the town council.
So with respect to what you're reading or in this staff report about changing regulations, you're saying that you're ruining any loss of parking by regulation, and that you think that the town is saying more or less than needs to be said about parking.
You know, I don't know, because I'm really not sure how this is gonna, I don't want to get in the way of the legislature. God forbid I would do that.
Have
But,
at it, right.
I'm just thinking that I can see problems down the road. And I don't know, maybe we should make it clearer, or maybe we can't make it clearer. But, you know, there's nothing here about retroactivity if we've denied parking for one building. And now someone comes in and says, well, look at my neighbor took down his garage and put up an ADU, and you're not making him, you know, have a parking space. Why did I have to do it? And why can't we go back and make it the same thing, make it fair for me? It's, you know, there's nothing about retroactivity here, and that's one problem I can see. But in all fairness, it isn't fair.
Well, you guys have that list of unintended consequences going, right? So it's a long list to start, but we don't know where it's going to land. I think that's what you're saying in a way.
If I could say also, this is a list that's really due to the state legislature. And I think this is one of the most impactful things about this legislation is parking. And I think most jurisdictions are really having to grapple with that. But the state has basically said that the need for housing outweighs the issue of parking in this case. And so we have to follow it, and we'll continue to track and see what's happening and do what we can. But yeah, our hands are pretty much tied on this issue.
I recall that we made a change to our parking ordinance with our updates to design review, and that was based upon state law also that said that when somebody renovates or adds to their home, that we can't require them to add a parking space if they're deficient in parking. So the state is really, you know, nipping at this in sort of more areas than just ADUs.
Yeah. Your kids have any other comment about that section?
Well, I just have a comment and I'm not sure if it's in this section
Yeah.
or in a third section, but I do have I understand that we cannot impact or enforce the commitment to the climate action plan that Corte Madera has established with these ADUs. But I was wondering, and I have a lot of ideas on how we can incentivize homeowners on, kind of going with more of our green policies for building these ADUs. Starting from perhaps monitoring, incentivization to, kind of like different things. So I'm not sure if this could be the part of the guidelines where we provide a preference or an educational program that would contribute towards owners being aware that when they are looking into building the ADU, that they also want to read and refer to the climate action plan that Corte Madera has put together, so that there is at least, kind of underlinement of the benefits for the homeowners in maybe various ways of how they can achieve it without spending extra money. And again, like I'm not sure, I kind of outlined the ideas there, but I'm not sure like if we address them now or later, or, kind of how we can go about that.
I know this is the comment section, but I'm going to comment on this as well. So I think we can do something outside the ordinance to provide education. And there is some work happening now on a variety of different things to help any kind of residential development become more efficient. So the Climate Action Committee is really focused on, for instance, heat pumps for water heaters. And I think we will have information provided to any kind of residential applicant coming in on that issue. We do have the REACH codes in place, and although these would not trigger those, there would be information available on those components. So we continue to strive towards those efforts, and they are separate from this specific ordinance, but we can also make sure that we're providing guidance as people come in and talk with our building team.
I don't know if like commission can impact somehow those as well, because I feel like we could encourage kind of some flexible design guidelines for the owners to maybe pre-wire for the solar panels, but not necessarily install solar panels on ADUs and, things like that.
I do believe that they would have to meet current building code, and that does require certain energy thresholds be met. So they may have to be, for instance, solar ready, or they may end up putting solar on the ADU or main home to be able to reach those thresholds necessary for the building code. And those building codes will be more strict a year from now once the new cycle of code comes through. So those minimums do have to be met as if it's any other residential building.
Okay.
And for what building code cycle will the solar panels be required? You don't know, right?
Is there any award program that town might have for the homeowners for the going above and beyond for the aligning with the climate action plan?
No, but that's a great idea. That could be something we could discuss internally for a future program.
So I feel like some recognition would truly also encourage maybe creating some pilot programs just to see how data wise, like how it can benefit them.
I will say, I know we're veering off of ADUs, but we are in the process of updating our fees for building. And through that process, we may be able to create incentives for certain types of upgrades or energy efficiency components and incentivize things that way. So that's something that we're exploring.
Okay. Thank you.
I have to say, when I just built my ADU, and a lot of the things that we were required to do, some of the, for just per the code, were pretty energy efficient. I mean, I went into a, heat pump. Everything was upgraded to the highest R values. We had to have our HERS inspector in. So it was, if you're building new, it's pretty strict. And then hopefully we'll get some more reach codes in to increase some of them. Well, the sprinklers are, to clarify that, I think the sprinklers are only not required if you're in an existing house. I think that's correct, but if you've got a separate building, it may be required. I mean, I was required, I have a sprinklered house, and so I was required to extend it to the
Yes,
to
but
the
otherwise a
separate-
new ADU does not require the main house to get
Yes,
sprinklers
so-
and vice versa. That the ADU being added does not require the main house to get sprinkled.
But back to the garage thing, we're just talking about what are the 25 feet and the 50%
Right.
garage. And so Margaret, in this guy here on number one, they're actually they're providing parking with the ADU above because they are providing a garage, correct? On a specific item, right, that we're talking about, not just parking in general.
Well, yeah, it says that,
It's above a garage, so that I mean, it doesn't call it out as parking, but it is a garage, so potentially could be used as off-street parking.
yeah, but then I mean, it also clarifies that the garage can be used as a part of the ADU and included in the size of the ADU, so. Yeah, there's two pieces.
There's
but-
two pieces of that. Okay,
Anyway, okay. I don't think I'm not hearing we have really anything to contribute to this for these guys. About the changes to the, ADUs above the garage issue. It's pretty clear, I think, Jim, unless you want to,
I mean, it's just basically saying that you could just build a 800 square foot 2-story structure. And it's the lower part of the structure is called a garage, no matter what it is. It could be living space. Or does it have to be a garage for parking?
no. It would not have to be a garage for parking. You can use it or not use it. Right? So if there's a garage there, you put the ADU over it, but leave the garage or not.
We don't do inspections to verify that people are parking cars in garages. So theoretically, someone could construct a combination garage and ADU above it and later use the garage for storage or a workshop and probably would not be aware of that.
Yeah.
But you can still convert a garage into an ADU as part of the older code
Yes.
by right. I think in total has to be 800 square feet by right.
An ADU.
Oh, but
and
it
an
can't be
A-
2 stories. Then again, it can't be 2 stories.
Yeah,
It
a
can-
detached ADU cannot be 2 stories.
But could two ADUs be one on top of the other? No.
Yeah, you're right.
This is why I need a chart.
Saying it's a separate ADU and you classify it as a separate ADU. Say one is. Theoretically could.
Yes, and a JADU has to be within an attached. It can't be a JADU cannot be created from a detached garage. We'll noodle on that for the next.
Yeah, okay.
And we'll see if we can develop some
All the way around.
handouts for the next meeting as well.
I just have one other,
Go ahead, Margaret. Yeah, go ahead.
there's a letter included in the package from, what jurisdiction is it?
Piedmont.
Yeah, about, what needs to be in a kitchen. Do we have to do anything about that?
We do not. So that was in relation to efficiency kitchen, which is for a JADU, and our definition just refers to the state statute. So a JADU just needs to have appliances and then storage.
Some kind of cooking facility, but that could be a hot plate.
Yeah.
Or maybe even just a microwave.
Does have a separate definition for a kitchen, which is required for ADUs.
So then, in this, description of architectural standards, say you've got a nice pretty garage that has a slope roof, and, somebody wants to put an ADU on top of it. They do not have to put a slope roof on top of that. They could put a flat roof on top of that second story ADU. They can do anything they want to. Since there's no objective design standard for that roof or that structure, right? It can look like any box on top of. Despite,
Correct. You can apply objective standards to attached ADUs, so that is something that the commission could explore, but the standard does need to be objective.
something established.
Compatible?
An objective standard
What would be a
language.
great word to use to make it look like the existing structure? Or roof line?
Conforming.
Conforming,
You probably could use a minimum roof pitch as an objective standard. That would be objective.
It must have the same roof pitch as the existing structure. That would be an
Same-
objective
did you
standard.
Say the same style of roof.
Style is not objective. But if you say it has to have the same pitch, so that if it's like an asymmetrical 40-degree, I'm making these things up, on the existing garage, then the ADU has to have the same thing and might get somewhere close to where you want to be.
at least a requirement on the pitch should have a minimum pitch. I mean, because I could see some, to have different pitches, but it still could be architecturally compatible, if I could use that word, out of context, of course.
I have one word, graphics. So, it would explain this, and I just had this musing about that it go from an attractive house to an abomination with a flat box on top. And to your point, then if we can dictate some simple words that would say match existing, something like that, that doesn't fall out of grace with the state, can we do something like that to add that into this? The height limits are defined, but there's plenty of height in these things. We can go way too high. No, that's not what I'm proposing. And so,
Yeah, we can look into this and incorporate that into a draft ordinance. And to clarify, we can't apply any objective standards to these state exempt ADUs, which would be a detached ADU that's 800 square feet. But to an attached structure, we do have the ability to add these objective standards.
A structure that's on top of the garage, because those are not statewide exempt ADUs.
That's a good catch.
okay, so you get my drift. Thank you. Right. Okay. Any other loose ends that come to mind about this?
No, I think we got it.
Um, window standard. So it says in here, staff recommends revising the window standard to also include glass doors. So, is that like a shower door? No, I'm just kidding. I don't know what. Give me some.
So our existing ADU ordinance requires clear-story windows on side elevations and rear elevations when they're within 15 feet of a shared property line. there's windows in the other house. But it doesn't discuss sliding glass doors or glass swing doors, which are oftentimes that the glazing on sliding glass doors, always glazing on sliding glass doors, much more than what you have on a clear story window or other. So the addition to the ordinance would clarify that you follow the same rules. A similar rule for a glass door on that side or rear elevation would need to be a solid door. And there is a provision to have neighbor permission or design review for non-clear story windows, which would be the same. It would apply to the sliding glass door. If it were to be proposed on that side elevation. So your choices would be solid, make it solid door, no glass. If you need the door on that elevation. Or obtain design review approval or the adjacent neighbors agreement.
Okay, so this becomes sort of an objective standard within the ordinance, then it's to say that if you're gonna have a glass door, or you can't have a glass door, it's gotta look like something, right? Is that what you're suggesting here, that we get the standard clarified for what kind of door or no door, glass door allowed within 15 feet of a shared rear or side property line?
Correct. We would, correct. It would follow a very similar rule that we have for windows.
Okay,
So it need to be a solid, you couldn't, oftentimes if someone has a side elevation, it's very close to a property line and they put a window there and a sliding glass door. Our ordinance would say the window needs to be clear story. Does not say what to do with that sliding glass door. So we would propose to add that sliding glass door would need to be solid.
all right.
What if it's a glass foldable partition?
Same.
Same. Regardless of the width, what if they get approved with the neighbor? They can put it? Okay.
So by agreement, they could have a sliding glass clear door within 15 feet of the property.
Yes, or non-clear story windows is our current ordinance allows for this for, if you want to have a non-clear story window on that side elevation, the neighbor permission would allow you to have it for design review. I think we've seen one design review for a non-clear story window.
Is that only when it's facing other windows?
It's only when it's facing other
Property.
non-clear story windows on the neighboring property and only when it's in 15 feet. And keep in mind, this objective standard cannot be applied to the statewide exemption ADU. The 800 square foot or less detached, for example. So we're not allowed, we could only apply this standard to the attached ADU.
Okay.
So just to clarify, so if, I mean, there is a restriction of 6'5", correct, for the clear story. But if someone is deciding to put nano wall that is about 14 feet wide and calls it a door, that kind of goes not compliant with 6.5, but it's a door.
Yes, that's why the proposed change in the draft ordinance that we would be able to say that the nano wall door cannot be installed on that side elevation. That's within 15 feet of shared property line. It needs to be a solid door.
But if they get approval from the owner, they can.
From the adjacent neighbor, correct?
Interesting. Okay.
What about an egress window? I've run into situations where you couldn't put a window small, but large enough to. Could we add something in the ordinance to allow egress windows when it's pertinent to bedrooms? Because sometimes you're tucked in the back of a yard and and you have to put your bedroom basically facing your yard. Because you need a sill height of 42 inches or less.
Yeah, and keep in mind, again, I just want to make sure everybody's clear that the window standard can't be applied to a statewide exempt ADU. But if it were one that wasn't statewide exempt, they need an egress window. We have seen people rotate their floor plan to move that window elsewhere and put the kitchen window on that side, for example. But yeah, I think you could put something into the ordinance that allows egress windows if necessary.
Well, it just allows more flexibility with the design. Otherwise, you're you're kind of limited to moving the bedrooms on the yard side. If, on a single story, I'm thinking single story, you have a 6-foot fence everywhere and you're not even gonna be able to see. I mean, on a 2-story structure, you're gonna have issues with privacy maybe, but you're only gonna have visibility to the clear story part of a normal window. Anyway, I've run across that a bunch of times and we've had to, jockey the Rubik's Cube to make it work. And I don't know if it's necessary if, no, nobody wants to look at, if you're out of a bedroom, they're gonna have a window covering anyway. Well, I don't know how the other commissioners feel about that, but if it's a single story,
Single story, it's fine, like you say, because it's not exposed in most situations, right? So, or staff can make them flip it. You don't want your teenager crawling out the window at night, so that's the biggest problem. But,
they'll find a way. Doesn't matter if it's 2 stories.
but so you're saying, as I read the sentence again, revising the window standard to include glass doors. So you're just saying inside of that sentence that you have in your standard, add glass doors into that. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it probably would be a new sentence, but it would accomplish the same thing. Where if the window standard would normally apply, then any door would either need to be a solid door or they would need to obtain permission from the neighbor or go through the design review process. And again, the purpose of the standard is to limit privacy impacts to the adjacent neighbor.
So do we need to anticipate other possible things like, say, the door size, a glass can't exceed 3 feet or something like that? Do we have to talk about door size on this issue? Or
I don't think we do.
Okay.
And we typically haven't seen this as an issue. Generally, the doors on ADUs are facing the interior
Yeah.
lot. They're not generally on this side or rear. We've seen entry doors and those tend to be solid, but we haven't seen, the large glass doors are really facing the interior of the property in most ADUs. we've reviewed.
Be bad design. Okay. All right. So, do you feel like you need any other feedback on anything in this?
Maybe some feedback on the ADU permit and if the commission agrees with staff's recommendation to no longer require an ADU permit for attached ADUs that are less than 800 square feet and don't exceed 16 feet. And then think the other issue is ADUs in the floodplain and if the commission is comfortable with the increased height when an ADU is being raised to comply with FEMA.
Right, for your chart. Yeah. Okay. So, on your first question about the ADU permit, I had, written here, clarify ADU permit versus building permit. That's probably a simple, explanation just because I didn't understand it, but if you're doing a separate ADU, that requires us, besides a building permit, it requires an ADU permit. It's 2 different permits for the same structure. Okay. So, and the benefit of relaxing the ADU permit does what? Does that make it state law doesn't require that we do that, does it?
It does not. I think the advantage is it aligns the attached ADUs with the detached ADUs because the detached ADU that does not exceed 800 square feet does not need an ADU permit. So we'd be treating them the same when they are the same size and the same height. And then I think the other advantage is it saves time and money for homeowners going through the process.
All right. Is that clear to you guys?
No.
No?
But,
Mark?
but if it's you still have to do a staff review if it's under a certain amount of square footage, so you still have to apply for a planning application, correct?
Is always reviewing ADUs for compliance with our ordinance and state law. And when it's an ADU permit, we do that as part of this planning process we've created. an ADU permit's not required, then we do it as part of the building permit review. So we are always checking that these objective standards are being complied with and checking for.
It's really just that there's a smaller number of objective standards that you can apply without the ADU permit, because the statewide exemption units have to go straight to building permit without any of the additional objective standards. And they have more limited criteria, whereas if we require the detached to go the same road as the attached, then they would also not be subject to those additional objective standards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. I'm processing. So,
For some reason, the state legislature treats detached less liberally than it does
Yeah,
attached. I mean,
right.
excuse me, treats detached with more liberality than attached, and it's hard to see why.
Say that again.
I'm sorry. So there is a provision that covers detached new construction accessory dwelling units. So they go straight to building permit, and we cannot impose the additional objective standards on them. There's another provision that says that an ADU can go straight to building permit if they're within the proposed space, within the space of an existing or proposed single-family dwelling. That's the attached ADU. So that one also goes straight to the building permit. You can't impose additional objective standards on it. But if it's detached and not new construction, in other words, I think garage would be a good example, then they're not covered by the statewide exemption, and they have to go through the ADU permit process and comply with the additional objective standards.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. That's helpful to explain. So, my thought is, yes, it should have a permit. Yeah. Or under that condition where she says that because it's not covered by state ordinance, unless we remove it, it would be required to get an ADU. Staff review would go over it, right?
If you go through the ADU process, you have those additional objective standards that are in our ordinance. If you don't have that process, presumably you just have to go to the building permit stage, and you have whatever criteria we put into the ordinance that lets you do that.
And I,
We're giving staff a little discretion on the design at that point, right?
We have to put out we have to put in our code what objective standards we want to apply.
Well, there's standards at least that they're still making a decision up on the standards that
Deciding
apply.
ministerially whether or
Yep.
not this particular project meets those standards.
Correct.
And I should be careful to say, if we're adding something that, if we're saying this other project does not need an ADU permit, we still could require the objective standards if we wanted to add that in. I think normally we check for the objective standards during the ADU permit process, but staff could presumably do that.
it actually would be checking for everything as part of the building permit. And the way the ordinance is structured is these objective standards that we can no longer apply to all ADUs. We've moved into a new section, and these additional objective standards would apply to ADUs that are not statewide exempt ADUs. And those include a detached ADU over 800 square feet or an attached ADU that includes new square footage, and that can be of any size.
And is the odds toolkit applicable or not?
It is not applicable.
Doesn't sound like we're in.
I think the biggest change is an ADU permit includes a courtesy notice to everyone within 300.
Includes what?
A courtesy notice. So we send out a notice describing the project, and there is a comment period, but individuals that are commenting are limited on what they can comment on. It's basically, they can comment that they don't think it complies with our objective standards, but you can't not like it because you think it's ugly, like it.
Right.
You're limited.
You're okay with that? Jim?
Well, I kind of understand it. I'm trying to process. So, I guess where I think the neighbors might want to know is, standard building permit, if it's within all the guidelines, it meets everything. The neighbors in a lot of cases don't have to be notified at all. So one day you could come back from your vacation and there's an addition. Whereas what they're saying is they're going to notify the neighbors. So at least they have some sort of vehicle to talk to the applicants and the planning staff on why they think it doesn't comply. Otherwise, it will just get built.
But this is something that we could put under the objective standards without requiring the ADU.
That it gets
That it
notified.
gets notified, yeah.
Could you,
No.
It wouldn't be notified, and only ADU permits or ADUs that require an ADU permit receive a notification. And of those 63 ADUs, 9 of them we processed an ADU permit. And with the proposed change to no longer require ADU permits of attached ADUs that do not exceed 16 feet or 800 square feet, 6 of those 9 would no longer require an ADU permit. So it's about 2/3. But the majority of ADUs have not required an ADU permit because they've been detached structures. Those go straight to a building permit process.
so I mean, you guys wrote it in here. So it's your recommendation that we leave it in so you guys can notify the neighbors on ADUs that don't meet the state standards?
Our recommendation was to no longer require an ADU permit, but if the commission feels otherwise, then we can continue to require ADU permits of attached ADUs.
If there is if the ADU is in the front yard, because now this is a new recommendation, will we be able maybe to limit to those because those are the front house and the most impactful? Oh, they are.
Exemption, then we can't limit it at all. But unfortunately, we could have one that is a statewide exemption in the front yard. No, because it would have to be, it would be, yeah, it would have to be under 800 square feet. It would have to be attached, or no, within the existing structure. I think only if we're compelled to allow it, and that would be through the ADU process. If our objective standards say you only get to build in the front yard to the extent that not allowing building in the front yard would make it impossible for you to have the ADU, that project would still be an ADU project. They have to go through that process and notice the neighbors.
Yeah, Margaret, is this making sense to you?
I would say 50%.
Okay. All right.
The problem that I see, like just with the idea of a courtesy notice, it's nice, but the idea of a courtesy notice also sort of, when you send a notice to somebody that this is going to happen, the expectation is that that person would have some input. And they really don't.
They can
They
come
don't.
before, they can come before staff and say,
But it wouldn't do them any good, really. There's not, it's just like,
they have to listen.
there's no way anybody, it's just like, we're faced with this stuff from the legislature, nothing we can do. We just have to comply. And we're trying to work it so that it's a little more palatable, but it really isn't.
I just feel like holding on to any vestige of control is important.
Yes, I think you're right, but you gotta give it up, Peter. Just like,
So we have additional question to that. So if we, in the front yard and it's above 800 feet, square feet, like, do we need to have an ADU permit by default? Or any detached structure that is above 800 square feet, do you need to have ADU permit?
A structure greater than 800 square feet needs an ADU permit.
Okay. So if what you're proposing to remove the ADU permit, it's for all of the structures that are below 800 square feet.
Correct. And currently a detached ADU under 800 square feet does not require an ADU permit, and that's per state law. And the
Right.
change we recommended was that an attached ADU that does not exceed 800 square feet or 16 feet in height also no longer require an ADU permit. And that aligns the attached and the detached ADUs that do not exceed 800 square feet or 16 feet in height.
Anything above and beyond that requires neighborhood notification and.
Yes. We are not required to, but we have the ability to.
Specifically, what's the difference? I shouldn't say the difference. What would be a difficult requirement that would be imposed on somebody needing a ADU permit as opposed to just what's required under the building permit? Is there an additional onus that the ADU permit puts on somebody? What?
$850 application fee.
So it's
and
money.
The ADU permit is required to be applied for and approved prior to building permit. So time associated with it. And money, the $850.
So $850, and what would you say the time is?
Yeah, about
6 weeks.
What?
4 to 6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks extra. And that would be the difference for somebody needing an ADU permit as opposed to just the building permit.
Yeah, and in addition. Wouldn't be, there's no notice for the building permit.
Sequentially speaking, it's not something that can run concurrent with the building permit application.
Law has very strict timelines for the building permit. So once that starts, there's a clock. And so this process is usually done before they apply for the permit.
Okay.
Say it's helpful to hear you all talk about it because keep in mind, we have a public workshop that will happen as well.
Yeah.
So these are things that we can be more inquisitive about to get feedback to bring back to you. So we can hear more community members and what their thoughts are on some of these sticky issues.
So what would be the benefit? I'm just trying to see like the scale. What's the benefit of asking someone to get the ADU permit under this circumstance? What is the benefit to us, to the town? Is there a benefit other than money?
Well, the money's not really the benefit, but I think it just allows us to apply additional standards, right? So the same standards would be in each.
Yeah.
So
What's the standard? Just the notice, right?
I will say a lot of jurisdictions don't require ADU permits and they have gone beyond state law in that way. And, you know, state law has changed about every single year, as Martha had noted. And I feel like we're eventually going to get to the point where
So too.
we're not going to be able to have an ADU permit. So I think we're trying to create a balance as to what we've had over time and then where state law is pushing us. And so the recommendation really recognizes that we've done courtesy notices. We've had these standards. So we're trying to balance these things where we hope that the state will look at our ordinance and feel like we're complying with state law, but we're still recognizing what our community needs and wants out of this process. So it is where that threshold is up to you, but that's what the recommendation is really trying to.
I guess my feeling about that, it matters, is that, you know, I would rather see something here, and I don't know what, something creative done about the way something looks and the way it fits into the community, rather than spend our time talking about this, which is, it seems to me the legislature is going to change it any day. Because it just, I think they probably skipped over it, actually. And I'd rather see our time and energy, I guess, put into the idea of making our idea about how we want this to affect neighborhoods compatible with what the legislature wants. I don't know exactly how, but we had a couple of suggestions.
That's a tall order, because I don't think the state lets us do anything about that.
Standard about roof pitch when an ADU is above a garage, that is something we could incorporate into. a
Well,
draft.
and maybe the pitch of a roof, and maybe incentivizing, you know, some kind of, as Valerie suggested, some kind of change that would help the environmental changes. I mean, I don't know offhand what it would be, but I'd love to see
I think
time and creative process being spent on that.
And I think it's right again, like it's staff's time, obviously, and money, but it feels like beyond just explanation. So perhaps I almost imagining like a website page where um uh, the homeowners can go to when they're defining which ADU they would like to proceed with, or a flow chart was mentioned before, just kind of to understand visually the guidelines, the height limitations, and all of these things. Also have a section of the guidebook or something that town recommends, right? Like not necessarily subjective, but to have some sort of like a visual aesthetical guidelines that, you know, this is what town is looking like. We love our town. Let's preserve the character of our town. And this is what we recommend. And even, and I'm not sure how it goes in regards to the state legislature when it comes to recommending the specific perhaps companies that provide certain styles that town might prefer. Perhaps we can have like a list of companies that say like, okay, this is what people usually in Corte Madera buy, and like, you know, this is a good referral to go to. So kind of navigate people to start researching towards things that are applicable in our neighborhoods. And obviously it's going to be homeowners' choice at the end, but at least we kind of created the guideline and recommendations and set of rules.
But maybe like a real estate agent could have some kind of, not agent, I don't know, real estate guru would have some kind of opinion about how, you know, a beautiful structure would improve your property value as opposed to a box with maybe lesser materials. And maybe somebody could talk about, you know, just property taxes. And it just seems that maybe there's room for at least education about the idea of preserving a nice appearance, to put, you know.
We could certainly create some guidelines. They just wouldn't be enforceable, so it would
Right.
be education based. I am curious, are you suggesting that you would be okay with no ADU permit if we had guidelines of that kind of flavor?
I think so. I mean, it sounds like we are moving that direction anyway. So
I don't think that would make
I'm
sense,
not,
so.
and it sounds like anything that is above 800 square feet will be needing the ADU permit anyways. So, and detached unit already doesn't need to have a permit, and it's exempt from any kind of you know, state objection or like our objections, right, to anything. So I I'm totally fine with that. And I just kind of, again, like want to encourage and educate public on what's out there on the market and guide them so that they just don't go and buy, a Home Depot storage and put a bed there. Okay.
Out of all the ADUs that were approved and built, how many times on the ones that were neighborhood notified, did you guys get comments and you had to work with the neighborhood and the applicants on?
Probably two or three. But I'll also say we do get questions from neighbors for an ADU that doesn't require an ADU permit. Once an ADU starts getting built and there's been a building permit issued, we'll oftentimes get questions on those too.
So in Corte Madera, the detached buildings that would fall under state, being exempt from state requirements, sometimes they're just not very attractive buildings. Garage or something that's outlier building. So if we do away with the permit, there would be no document that says you get to say anything about conformance to the architectural standard of the main house or do something, right? Could you imply in print some architectural standard for those outlying buildings that have no redeeming quality, but you could instruct them to enhance their attractiveness.
Because the building permit is reviewed by planning staff, we would have exactly the same power to enforce whatever objective standards we put in place. The trick is to come up with objective standards that would enforce compatibility, given that it's hard to come up with them. I mean, there's no cookie cutter way, criteria for houses in Corte Madera, so difficult to come up with those standards. But if we could enforce them just as easily through the building permit process without requiring the additional permit.
So what it comes down to is, do we believe that a booklet of guidelines and instructions and all of that would suffice in lieu of some standards that they would have to review?
I think so. It sounds like we're already in a position where we have no control over it. Someone can go and get a container, put windows in it, right? I mean, that's what some of the ADUs could look like, and say it's 800 square feet and it's detached and we put it in the backyard, right? So there's no anything that we can do to prevent that from happening, sounds like. So having a container attached now, right? It's the same thing to me. So I feel like the only way of how people will not be buying a container is if they're educated that and love the town, and how we could spread the love is through the outreach.
We could figure out a way to make it mean dollars. That would.
Can I do that? No, I'm just kidding. So, the fact is that, we're stuck with, creating an onerous requirement for somebody to spend that $850 in 4 to 6 weeks. Right, just because of staff time, getting to it, getting it in the queue, reviewing it, and then going back to them. So it adds that time. So that's kind of onerous to add to the process. For a guy who might want to spend $60,000 to turn a building into a 30,000, turn it into an 80. Right? Not that much. Maybe not even that. Maybe it's ready to fire, right? He just needs a permit, or he wants to call it an ADU. I don't know. Okay. I could cave on that one. Just go to Valerie will write the guidelines.
Yes.
That sounds like.
ADUs in the floodplain, and if additional height above 16 feet should be allowed if the ADU needs to be raised. And this is not required, that the commission has.
I think anything that encourages people to raise their house for to comply with floodplain problems would be a good idea. And I think it would also sort of indicate that we're practicing what was preached.
I've got no problem with it.
Okay, so in that section that you have highlighted, there, heights of ADUs and floodplain.
And just to clarify, an ADU that's raised above 16 feet would need an ADU permit since it exceeds the 16-foot height limit. So we're only recommending no ADU permits if does not exceed 800 square feet and does not exceed 16 feet in height.
And
Because this is this is our local standard.
Hmm.
Because this isn't part of the state code. So we have a
Correct.
local thing that we're adding on, so you would want to add a ADU permit to it.
and that's above 11.5 nav. Is that where we are with that as base height for 16 feet?
Yeah, so it's the 1 foot above base flood elevation, so that's 11.
11. So that would. In the floodplain, we've got and over there on the floodplain side, they're down around 8 or 9, something like that. So a lot of those homes they've got the 3-foot step up now to get above, so they get 16 feet above that point. Right, so if the street elevation or the driveway or the first floor is at 8 or 9, right? Then they have to get up 3 feet to 11, and then there's 16 feet on top of that.
So then it would be 26 feet high.
The max height would be 20 feet. So you would get 1
20 feet.
additional foot for each foot you had to raise it out of the floodplain.
Why would you require the ADU permit in this case as well? I mean, at the end of the day, we're just talking about the differences in notification, correct? And a lot of staff time. And at the end of the day, if they meet the guidelines, it's going to be pretty much not necessarily by right, but I mean, we're going to allow it.
So a maximum of 20 feet would mean to say then that it's 20 feet above 11 nav. So they would then get 10 feet per floor. And that would be the total height of that unit they'd be allowed to have. So they could do 2 floors on top of that.
Maximum height of the structure, if it's elevated, is 20 feet.
Right. So they could do,
20 feet above.
they could
grade.
do 2 stories.
Grade measured to the
But you
highest.
can't
point
have
of
a
the structure.
2-story.
You could clarify that
ADU,
it
I thought.
doesn't. 2 stories.
But
the-
the ADU cannot be 2 stories. You can have.
And I think the way it's written, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can have 1 foot for every foot you have to raise it, not you just get 20. So if you raise it 1 foot, that means you have a 17-foot tall structure,
I got it. Okay.
but you increase the setback by a foot.
Are we allowed to do 2 stories, 2 stories in the backyard now? Wasn't that a new legislation that was coming through? Like, there was,
Possibly.
yeah. So currently you're only allowed to do 1 story up to 20 feet, right? That's the exemption. So
Okay. I don't want to see that architecture. Okay.
Could we
I-
back up for a minute? Because I have another question about the number of bedrooms. It says staff recommends removing the limit on the number of bedrooms. And you said that it might indicate a bias or a what?
He has recommended against limits on bedrooms because they are concerned that it could give rise to claims that a bedroom limit is a discrimination against certain types of households, like households with large families. And as a practical matter, there's only so many bedrooms under the building code that you can get into the square footage that we're talking about. But we can't directly limit bedrooms, at least HCD doesn't think we can.
I think my biggest concern was having multiple ADUs, and now it sounds like we can even go even for more, like if we're converting a garage and adding something on top and then calling it an ADU as well, and then having two detached, let's say. My concern is the density on the lot and not having any fire separation walls, because it becomes a multifamily dwelling, and we don't have detached, probably better addressed in that way, but the ones that are attached, I'm having the most concern. Garage, if you're converting garages by default, having an hour wall separation, but the one that is attached, let's say on top of the garage, doesn't. And then let's say you have 3 families now living there. So that's kind of my biggest concern.
I
safety.
kind of recall having it, I did one and they made me double the sheetrock between the walls to get the point separation.
Mhm.
Uh,
But is it a requirement or?
The building, when we got the building permit, they required the extra sheetrock.
separation? Mhm.
But the JADUs, since they're within a household, it's almost like renting a room out.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you're allowing them to use, in some cases, the kitchen, but definitely the access to the bathroom. So that would be hard to imply, but I've had experience with them during the building permit process, not the planning process.
Mhm.
What was it, comment?
But it could be a comment, but then it cannot be a comment, right? Like if it's not a requirement, they might not even comment. So in your case particularly, someone caught it.
And just to clarify, an ADU does need to meet fire separation per the building code. So typically it's an extra layer of sheetrock to reach
Okay.
the required fire separation. It's just when it's a JADU that requirement does not apply.
I see. So, but is there a limitation to how many JADUs you can? have?
A maximum of 1 JADU.
Okay, okay, then. Okay, thank you for clarification.
And an ADU is supposed to have their own exit anyway, so there's another egress exit that would also satisfy another exiting code. For the occupancy.
Right. So, it has to follow building code, basically. And that's their job to make sure that happens, so. A lot of worthwhile discussion here, so, anything else you want to throw at us or that we should, consider?
I think we're good.
I mean, Peter, would it be worthwhile to ask the question about if the community would want to be notified if something was over 800 square feet and let the community make that decision? About an ADU permit? I mean, would that be something that can come up in their discussions with the community outreach? I mean,
I think that they will now, yeah, she will, ask that.
yeah, I mean, that would be a good question.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, if that's where we're going, we're probably not gonna have it. Probably get lifted anyway, but it'd be worth to get the community involved
Yeah,
with that
I
decision.
think that what I'm hearing is that you guys have, I know you've had such great conversations with the public, so you're gonna throw all this at them. Is that gonna be, it'll be here correctly, 17th?
17th, and it's going to be in person with Zoom as an option. And we'll also be providing food as well to help entice more people.
That's great, okay. So. Do we conclude this item? Are you guys okay?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Well, let's do that. Conclude this item. And let's move on to commissioner reports, staff reports. Valerie has to excuse herself from the last meeting.
I do have to. I swept with Stan and then I forgot about that.
And anyone
thought
here
it was at
report
a
on
later
the
date.
city council or town council meeting that we last occurred?
Was not prepared for this when I have to think about what was on the agenda.
the mayor.
Thought it was.
Thank you. So I will say it was a somewhat light agenda, but there was an item of Martha's that you all have provided a recommendation on for the condo maps of the two properties. So that was approved by the council. And then we provided an update on the shoreline engagement effort that concluded and had council acceptance on next steps for that effort. And then I believe there was an update on the storm drain master plan. Is that I think it was. That's all I can remember at this
Well,
moment.
that's pretty good. Yeah.
I'll make sure to pull up the council agendas beforehand to make sure.
Bob Bundy showed me the pump station over there behind Nugget Market over there. It's quite an impressive structure. You guys should go over there and look at it. See where your tax dollars are going. It's really quite cool. Anyway, so yeah, what would you like to tell us?
Yeah, well, first of all, we just wanted to introduce Claire Smith as our new planner. She's been with us for 2 weeks now permanently. She served as a consultant in our department for about 1.5 years before that. So I know you all have met her in some points, but just wanted to formally introduce her as our newest planner and
Okay.
completeness of our planning staff. So,
Great.
and she even stayed this whole meeting tonight. And then also Martha just stepped out, but just wanted to note that Martha and Adam and our consultant Plan to Place received an award last week in Riverside at the American Planning Association California chapter for the housing element outreach. So I attended. It was great to see them accept that and yeah, and bring it back to Corte Madera. So congratulations to Martha and team on that award. And then also this week marks the launch of our solar permitting online application. So we now are providing instant solar permits. It's for contractors only, but they can basically fill out our online form and it provides an instant approval. So, and that is for residential solar projects. And we are looking at expanding that service to other types of permits. So that'll be coming. And then also the REACH codes, which you all had informed on, are also in effect. So that's residential remodels and additions over 750 square feet are now required to meet a certain threshold of energy upgrades. So this is a REACH code that's going beyond our normal building code that's required by the state. So that's now in effect. And we have not had any inquiries on that one yet. So we've done quite a bit of public information. So we hope that people are aware of this and are not surprised when they come in, but it is now in effect. And that was actually approved by the state as well. And then just a note on our application for 240 Tamil Vista. I think we last reported that we were seeking guidance from the state on the proximity of the project from a major transit stop, which is the SMART station. HCD declined to provide us technical guidance on that issue. And so we've been working with the applicant on what their next steps are. So we do anticipate them to be changing the project and resubmitting something to us. So we're waiting on that. And then also, as you know, we are going to be doing the ADU workshop on the 17th. So we would love your help promoting that. We're doing our best to promote and we will have food here. But also let us know if you plan to attend just to make sure we don't have a Brown Act issue. And then we'll, of course, be reporting back to you when we bring this ordinance back in November for your review and hopeful recommendation. That's all I have to report tonight.
Amy,
Thank you.
what does that mean, declined? Decline the applicant's definition of a half a mile or?
So they have the option of what requests they take up and decide to write a determination about. So they just declined to provide us any kind of recommendation on our request.
Fleshed it out a little by saying they could not find any proof that the project site was within a half mile of the station. I think it was just a bridge too far for them, but of course, they're not going to say that.
Got it. I understand.
So, all right, and that declares enough for them to go force the developer to go back and say,
Yes. They were saying, you should be more liberal in your interpretation than HCD. And candidly, my feeling is it's really not possible to be more liberal interpretation than HCD.
so, I mean, just to interject that there have been other applications for which that definition of transit stop has been considered and discussed. Is there any other state department that would take that on in some way and, you know, say that this is a major transit stop or not? We've never gotten a good definition from the state or anybody about what that means. And we've argued with the developers. That's a bus stop. That's not a transit stop.
You're exactly right. And they have letters on some and that's the only guidance we have is the technical assistance they provided on other questions for other major transit stops.
It was
Um,
more about the distance, right? It was more about the distance than it was about the stop itself.
Both.
Well.
Yep.
So are we back to like 100% affordable, like 115 unit type of building, maybe?
That's what we're anticipating. So nothing's for sure yet. We haven't received a new submittal.
Regarding the solar permitting, that does not include storage systems. That's just about the panels and converters.
It does include, no, it does not at this time. I think we are just with this platform at this moment, it's just solar permitting and I think it's the panel upgrade, but not anything beyond that. So that's an option that we'll look into. So we're slowly moving into this instant permitting realm.
Or otherwise known as over the counter. Right. That's great. All right.
So Peter, looking at the next meeting, I just want to tell you I won't be here.
Okay. Well, that's
And here's the issue. I'm scheduled to do the town council
Uh-huh.
meeting this coming Tuesday, but I won't be here to report back on it. The next meeting. If the next meeting is the 22nd.
So that is October 15th that you would schedule. for.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I could certainly take that on for you, I think. You want to trade for November 19th.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay. Put that on my calendar. All right.
Do we have any items for next meeting? No? Possibly.
Are two tentative items, one for a second story addition and the other for a demolition and new home.
Yeah, the story poles are up for Oakdale.
Yes.
Drive by. So yeah, it looks like a stick pole, a stick forest. Right. Great. Okay. All right. So with that said, we've got some notes to consider. There was one spelling that Rome as a city should be changed to Rome as the venture around. Spelled ROME. Other than that, I don't know if anybody has any changes or additions to the notes. Okay. Motion to approve?
Yes.
Aye, okay, so by voice vote, we all approve the notes with that change. And, then we go to, a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn made, okay.